One of the most deceptive words in the English dialect is belief, for a person can believe in anything and still be 100% wrong. A belief is an opinion or an idea that one holds to be true, although they have no evidence to support it, and this can only lead to doubt, which is uncertainty. To believe in anything means to simply accept it, and just because you have company in your acceptance does not make your belief true. The only thing that an intelligent person would accept as a belief that others have to accept as a fact is the belief that they exist, for no one can logically deny another's existence. Now, whether or not you accept a belief or conscientiously pursue facts in order to know, it is totally up to you. But do know this undeniable truth, that you cannot believe and know at the same time, for you can only believe in what you don't know. Welcome to Back to the Basics, where you learn facts, hope you embrace it. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. I'm fearless. Welcome to Back to the Basics, where you learn facts, hope you embrace it. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. Watch, like, share, bring in. The world is filled with believers, and probably the most destructive example of the power of belief, hands down, is religion. I say this because many people who subscribe to religious belief don't know very much about the religions they subscribe to. Recently, this conversation on who is a Jew or who is not, or who is a Hebrew or who is not, and who is the tribe of Israel and who is not have been circulating on social media as if it has any factual relevance. And this situation is a prime example of the type of ignorance, confusion, and racism that religion continues to breed in this world. Just think about this for a second. If I had two children and I favored one child over the other, most people would say that I'm wrong, because it is wrong to show favoritism to one particular child over another that you created. The psychological effect can be devastating, especially to the less likened child. Now, since so many people believe that we are all children of God, then why is it okay for this God to have a chosen people that he considers better than all other people on earth? Deuteronomy 7:6 clearly states that the Lord thy God has chosen thee, in reference to the children of Israel, to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Now, even a blind person can see that this is clearly racism that most people ignore and accept simply because of religious belief. In the matter of weeks, I have seen hard, staunch Christians become so-called Hebrews overnight simply because they believe in misinformed celebrities. The reality is, it does not really matter who is who in these so-called holy books, because religious books are nothing more than mythology, plagiarized from ancient Egyptian and ancient Sumerian realities. But those who control the media don't want you all to know that. What they want is for you to keep on talking about a 6,000-year-old religion because it perpetuates a belief system. And through meaningless controversies, they can distract you from the truth. You see, all religious belief demands that you do not question the authorities, because the moment you do, then you become the person who have lost faith. But faith in what? Misinformation and lies? And what does that really entail? It suggests that no thinking nor reasoning is necessary when you're a believer. And the victims of religious belief just simply listen, and they listen and never stop to check whether or not what they're accepting is right or wrong, placing their whole mind, body, and soul into these recent books that have never been verified as a fact to date. It's time to draw a line. And those of you who want to know the truth, the fact of the matter is, the Old Testament, called the Torah, was plagiarized from the Babylonian Enuma Elish 7 tablets of creation, as well as the Gilgamesh epics. And the New Testament, called the Bible, is simply a remix of the Old Testament. And the last testament, called the Quran, is a remix of the remix. That is why when you read the Quran, it talks about things that was already in the Torah as well as the Bible. For example, in Al-Islam, there's a very popular story concerning an Arabian prophet named Muhammad, who received a book from an angel in the form of a man named Jibril or Gabriel. And in this story, Muhammad was told to Iqra, which means to read in Arabic, which he responded he could not, for he was not learnt in that particular language in that book. Well, in the Bible, You can find this same story in the book of Isaiah as a vision, chapter 29, verse 11 to 12, where it clearly states that the book was delivered to him that is not learnt, saying, "Read." And he responded, "I am not learnt." But hey, who am I to point out these facts? Now, the reason religious books appear to be so convincing is because, like Santa Claus, although the characters are often fake, the places in which the characters reside or visits, like the North Pole, is very much real. So likewise, in religious books, the places like the Tigris-Euphrates River, Egypt, and Mesopotamia are very real places, but most of the characters in these books are not so real. When you do comparative studies of the ancient Neolithic Egyptians and ancient Sumerian history, you would find where many of the religious characters were stolen from. For instance, many religious people believe that Adam and Eve were the first two human beings. However, this is just not the truth, for there were many people on earth before Adam and Eve of your religious books. In fact, the Adam and Eve story of your scriptures were plagiarized from the ancient Sumerian story of Adapa and Titi, as well as the ancient Egyptian story of Geb and Nut. Adapa and Titi are associated with one of the many Sumerian gods, an Anunnaki named Enki. And the so-called serpent you were taught was the devil in the Bible was none other than one of Enki's many sons named Ningishzida, who taught Adapa and Titi the Hindu religion, for they were black Asiatic people, or Hindus. The Abraham story in your scriptures was plagiarized from the Sumerians as well. The name Abraham means father of a multitude. He was a Syrian from Ur of Chaldea, and his name came from an actual person of Mesopotamia named Ibrahim from the Sumerian culture. And get this, the name Ibrahim relates to the Anunnaki name of their planet-sized ship called Nibiru, which means planet of the crossing. Now, you should be able to reason this because in the Bible, the character Abraham crossed the Tigris and Euphrates region from Ur of Chaldea, and the people on the other side saw him and said, Ibri, which eventually became the word Hebrew, which is not the name of a people nor a language, but an incident. In fact, the word Hebrew etymologically means one from the other side. That's all. And so Abraham of your scriptures was not a Hebrew. No one is, for that matter. Now, this Hebrew incident ties into the Semitic conversation that has been propagated on all social platforms of recent. You will find that the people who controls the media has been using this word anti-Semitic as a weapon towards anyone who addresses issue with Europeans who practice the Jewish faith. But let's be clear, what exactly is a Jew or a Semite, and what makes one anti-Semitic? Because it seems that everyone is overlooking the definition in the dictionary. In truth, the word Jew is a Yiddish word that is phonetically misinterpreted for Judah, created by the Europeans called the Spaniards and the Polish Russians. The so-called Hebrew equivalent that is commonly used for Jew is Yehudi, and it was passed into the English language from the Greek Iudos by way of the Latin Judaeus, and is found in early English in a variety of forms such as Iudia, Gu, which later developed into Jew. So the word Jew or Gu is nothing more than a short combination of the words Greek and Hebrew. The people who are known as the Jews today took the name Judah, who according to the Bible story was the fourth son of Jacob, or Jacob, who became Israel after fighting with an angel. What? And made up a new nationality. That is why, oftentimes, if you call a European who practices the Jewish faith a white person, they will respond by saying, I'm Jewish.
Which month is White History Month? Well, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay.
So, they took the first part of the word Judah and threw away the last part of the pronunciation and labeled themselves simply Jew. With that said, it should be clear that the word Jew is not a so-called Hebrew word. It should become clear that the word Jew is not synonymous to Israelites or Yehudi, as many of you have been led to believe. However, the fact that a group of Europeans who decided amongst themselves to name themselves Jews, we should all respect that fact that they made this word for themselves. And so Nubians should not be calling themselves Jews, for we are not them. In fact, there is no letter J in the original so-called Hebrew language.
Message!
Which should make you wonder how the Yiddish word Jew found its way into the modern English translation of the Bible. Things that make you go, The people who call themselves Jews today, like all others, are converts who came from Europe. Many people think they are from Germany. However, they are not. They are descendants of two racial groups. One is from Russia, called the Ashkenazims, and the other is from Spain, called the Sephardims. They are not from the time of the biblical Abraham, because there was no biblical Abraham.
Message!
Yet, many Nubians who call themselves Israelites, many of which who are reading someone else's translations, like the European King James Version of the Bible, which were written and translated by the same Ashkenazim and Sephardim Jews, which is the reason the Yiddish word Jew is in the biblical modern English translation. Boom! Now, when we examine the word Semite, we must realize that there is no group of people called Semites anywhere in the Tanakh called the Torah. This word Semite was first introduced by German historian August Schlosser in 1781. By 1797, the word Semitic began to denote major languages that include so-called Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Assyrian, and many other languages of the Middle East and Northern Africa. By 1826, it began to be ascribed as a noun for names of a linguistic family. By 1879 to 1881, German radical, nationalist, and race agitator named Wilhelm Marr first used the word anti-Semitismus, which was not restricted to anti-Jewish theories, actions, or policies, but almost always incorrectly used in this sense anyway to criminalize people who have issue with those who call themselves Jews. The reason I say incorrectly is because the implication, which is misinformation, is that the word Sem is Shem, one of Noah of the Bible's sons. And the fact is, Noah had no son by the name Sem. Sem is a Latin Greek rendition of the so-called Hebrew name Shem. Say it with me, Shem. There is a difference. Let's think about this for a second. If the Noah flood story in the scriptures is true, that would mean that religious people believe that everyone on planet Earth before the so-called flood died, except for Noah and his family. This is significant. That's Genesis 6:17, and in the Quran, chapter 29, verse 14. Did you get that? And if you believe these books, then this would mean that everyone on Earth right now came from one of Noah's triplet sons whom he had in the same year, Genesis 5:32. And these sons of Noah are Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis 9:26 to 27 clearly states that both Japheth and Canaan, who was a cursed seed, Genesis 9:25, would live in the tents of Shem, making all of them Shemites, not Semites. Now, this is significant because Genesis 10:6 names the sons of Ham, which are Cush, which relates to Ethiopia, Mitzrayim, which relates to Egypt, and Phut, which relates to Libya. Now, since they came from one family, then it stands to reason that all of the people in these countries speak a very similar dialect, which will make their language Semitic. And if this religious story is true, that would mean that everyone on the planet today are Shemites, or so-called Semites, and are thus descendants of Noah and his family.
Message!
Now, if the people on planet Earth collectively wants to live a biblical mythological life, then we would have to be fair and do things in accordance with the religious books. And if we do things according to the scriptures, then only then it would be safe to say that everyone on the planet today would be a Shemite. And thus, if that is the case, then no one can truly be anti-Shemitic or anti-Semitic, for that would only be a form of self-hate if we were truly following the words of the scriptures. But most of you are not. You pick and choose what part of the scriptures you want to keep and what part you want to reject. Now let's go a little higher. You know what I'm saying? This is far from being deep. This is heavenly. If a person identified the word Semitic with languages, then it is safe to say that everyone on planet Earth speaks some form of a Semitic dialect. Genesis 11:1. Since all the languages on Earth comes from one language, which would have been Noah's family's language. Don't forget, everyone died in the flood. Now, if Noah existed, what was his language? It could not have been one of the so-called Semitic dialects because according to the Torah, Shem was Noah's son, not the other way around. And the last I've heard, the sons usually come after their father. And so Noah's language could not have been a so-called Semitic language because Sem is a derivative of his son Shem's name. And Shem, having grown up with his father Noah, he would have been speaking his father's Noah's language. This is called right knowledge. You need to give up spookism. But it seems like most of you in this ignorant world wants to skillfully dance in and out of truth, adding and subtracting anything you don't like, making yourself whatever you want. But truth doesn't work that way. Now, for those of you who want to deal with reality, the ultimate reality, let us reason. The truth is the flood of Noah's story was taken from Utnapishtim, also called Zosudra and Atrahasis of ancient Mesopotamia, whose language was cuneiform or hieroglyphics, which are two Greek names for the same ancient mystery language called Nuwapic. Don't believe me? Check it out. If you did some research, you would find the true story of the flood in the Gilgamesh epic tablets. You can also find the flood story recorded in ancient Tamaray, Egypt. The reason I keep referring to Hebrew as a so-called language is because the whole deception of the modern scriptures is carried on to this very day by people not understanding the original language that the people before Ibrahim spoke. Most people believe that the Hebrew and Arabic of today are the original ancient languages, when they are not. Going backward, before the Quran, you find the New Testament translated from the original Aramaic into Greek and Latin. Two languages totally incapable of expressing the original Phoenician, Akkadian, Ashuric, Chaldean, and of course, Nuwapic, the language of the gods, and the language of Nimrod, who was really Sargon II, in which these scriptures were plagiarized from. The Torah and the New Testaments translated into Latin, Greek, and English are very poor translations. The Torah itself was taken out of the cuneiform, then translated into Phoenician, and then into what is being called Hebrew, then further into modern Hebrew languages, incapable of expressing what the original tablets of the Anunnakis that the Torah and the Bible and the Quran was plagiarized from were saying. There's another story in the Tanakh, Exodus 9:26, which states that the Israelites resided in a city called Goshen, which is the biblical choice of a city in Egypt. The proper historical name for this particular area is Hutkapatah, or Memphis, near Cairo, Egypt, or Avaris, Northeast Delta, which was the territory of the mulatto group of Egyptian invaders called Hyksos, the Shepherd Kings, or their better known name, the Hyksos. The word Hyksos means chief of a foreign land. Now, were these the real Israelites? Absolutely not, for there was no real Israelites. That is mythology. The Hyksos, however, are the closest comparison to some form of historical account of the so-called Israelites spoken about in the Torah. However, this story does not line up with any Egyptian history or records. In fact, there is no Egyptian records that matches the religious doctrine of Egyptians and so-called Israelite encounter. It should be very clear now that religious books are not concerned with the historical identity of the so-called Israelites. In fact, none of the information in any of these religious books can be verified, and that is because they are all lies. They have found no evidence of any of the stories that your Torah, your Bible, and your Quran propagates daily. But the methodology of tying in Egypt and Sumer gives it the appearance of authenticity, when in fact they are all myths and fictions added on to original stories of ancient Egypt and Sumer, who had no accounts of these religious stories in their records. For it is just that, the greatest story or lies ever told, and most of you sadly wants to believe it. I'm KHAFRE, and this is Back to the Basics.
about it.
Facts we stated. You wanna know something? Go back to basics. Most saw trapping was called the Matrix. The world civilized, yet it's hard to face it. So I spread truth, hope you embrace it.